I've found that society never stops changing. It always moves forward, it's always progressing, and so I always have new thoughts, and I always have new perspective on things because society, it doesn't change and it does. It doesn't change because we struggle with the same fundamental issues that Jesus, Paul, Peter, and even Moses and Daniel back in their day did. It just takes different forms today, and that's how society is always moving. So I always have new thoughts on that. One is, I don't think that we understand how much we lead from fear within our society. I think that this last election was a huge example of that. Whether you are GOP or DNC or anybody in between, these organizations led from fear. The GOP, if Hillary's elected, this will happen. You know, the DNC, if Donald is elected, this will happen. And if you get people afraid, you can get them to do some pretty horrible things because people react very strongly. There's a lot of emotional reaction, an intense emotional reaction to fear. And so my biggest thing would be, there are so many people, especially when it comes to the LGBT community, however you want to define people who identify with that community, there are a lot of conservative and evangelical Christians who have fear of that community for whatever reason. And we have to ignore the fear. We have to stay away from the fear. We can't allow fear to give us permission to devalue people. The fear of some people should never give us permission to devalue many people. That's one of the things that I see today. The first place I would encourage people to go would be to lean into the sovereignty of God. God is in control. He always has a plan. If you're a Christian and if you doubt that, go read the end of Revelation. God wins. I mean, God's not up in heaven, you know, in his heavenly throne, getting up and pacing back and forth, doing face palms, wondering how things are going to end. That's not what's happening. God is always on his throne. He's not getting up from his throne. He has a plan towards tomorrow. If we really believe in God's sovereignty, that gives us the capacity to be gracious today and also bold with our voices as we engage society. And I would say this, you know, we need to do that on two levels. Number one, I don't think that we need to change our theology. I do think that we need to be more empathetic with people. A lot of the times when I'll speak, people will think that I'm asking them to change what they believe. Not at all. I believe that we need to lean into our empathy. I'm not asking people to think differently about their theology. I'm asking them to think deeper about people. The other thing I would say is this. We need to realize there's a big difference between acceptance and approval. A lot of people don't think that there is, but there is. Acceptance is about loving a person where they are, for who they are, no matter what. I mean, I think that's what Jesus says when he says in Matthew 5:46, if you only love those who love you, what reward will you get? I think it's what Paul means in Romans 12:18 when he says, as much as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. But approval or agreement, I think that's different. I think that's throwing your support behind somebody's life choice, like a life choice to be in a same-sex relationship, a life choice to take a job that you know will be destructive for their family, and so on and so forth. And I think that the kind of love that we need to model for people, I think that God's love, that kind of love relies on acceptance, not agreement. I think that anytime love is based on agreement, it's quick and it's cheap and it's not really love. I think it means making the decision to get to know people, making the decision to get to know people who are different from you. I mean, our differences should drive us to people, not from them. And we should get to know people, not wanting the opportunity to steer them our way. You know, we want to model Jesus for them, but I think that it means really getting to know a person, putting your own preferences aside, learning to understand a person, learning to understand who they are, what happened in their life, what do they fear, what are their hopes, what are their dreams, what are their joys, what has happened to them in the past that has made them fear God, love God, or abandon God. So I'll give you an example of this. I really wanted to do this. When the book Messy Grace released in the fall of 2015, I got together a bunch of millennial people who identify as LGBT in some way or form. And at our church, we have a lot of people who attend, many of them unchurched, and many people who are in same-sex relationships or even asexual relationships. And even though they know that our church has a conservative stance on marriage, they still come because we treat people well. We don't treat people like projects. We treat them like actual human beings. And so I wanted to learn more about what they were thinking. So I said, I want you to come over to my house every Tuesday from 8 to 10 between September and December. I'm not going to try to de-gay you or anything like that, but I want to hear your story and I want to talk about Jesus. And I learned some really interesting things. I learned, for instance, that almost all of them, not all, but almost all of them felt that way since they were young. I also learned that many of them tried to change, but they couldn't. About half of them tried to kill themselves when they were in middle school or early high school. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize that the peak age of suicide for high schoolers right now is in the 10th grade. And then you throw other burdens on top of that, and it just increases dramatically in the 10th grade. Every single one of these individuals had a bad church experience. They came out to someone, they were treated harshly, and not all, but almost all of them believed that God hated them. You know, and I asked them, I said, why do you attend our church? And I didn't mean it like, why do you attend our church? I meant, why do you come to our church? Because you know our theological conviction. And their answers were varied, but it was interesting. Like, one said, I come here because I don't need to agree with everything a church believes to attend here. I have friends and relationships here. Another person said, because I want to hear the gospel. Another individual, another man said, and his words, not mine, he's like, I don't want to go to a gay church because the churches that I've been to, they're quote unquote affirming, talk a lot about social issues, but I want to hear about God. And so I think there's something there that we need to pay attention to. And so these individuals still go to our church, and walking away at the end of this group was just tremendous. I felt like I had a better understanding. And there was even a young lesbian couple that stayed back on the very last night. And during the whole fall, we had not touched on homosexuality once, but they said, looking at Jesus' life and how he lived has really changed us. We love each other, but we don't know if this is right. Can we talk to you about our relationship? And I said, absolutely. Let's sit down and talk, because I think that those kind of conversations, difficult conversations on living, they're best had in the context of trust and relationship and love. And so I think that's what it looks like in my case for empathy. And I think that depends on where you work and who you love. I mean, if you think about it, Jesus confused people. And one of the reasons why the religious elite of his day did not like him was because they could not peg him. When they thought that he would be truthful, he was gracious. When they thought he would be gracious, he was truthful. He even confused his own disciples. And here's the thing about Jesus I wish was true of me. He didn't care. He really didn't, because he was all about the glory of God. And then I look at myself, and I care way too much, and I'm trying not to care. I lean into my love of God, but he just didn't care. He didn't care about being criticized. Like when he was at Matthew's tax collector party. Remember the Pharisees, they said, why does your teacher eat and drink with sinners? And yet, Jesus said, hey, it's not, the sick, or it's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick. And so I think to myself, wow, he was not afraid to be misunderstood. He was not afraid of that. And I figure if I'm going to be criticized for anything, I'd rather be criticized for the things that Jesus was criticized for. Now, were there times when Jesus proclaimed truth? Absolutely there were. I mean, the Sermon on the Mount, over and over again, countless examples. But even when you look at how Jesus interacted with people, like for instance, the woman at the well in John 4 versus Nicodemus in John 3. With Nicodemus, Jesus starts with the truth in his conversation and ends with grace. Both the woman at the well in John 4, he starts with grace and he ends with truth. And so that's what I love about Jesus. He was so intentional, and he did not have a cookie cutter method.